Emma Parker had always believed that betrayal would arrive with warning signs. A suspicious text message, a lipstick stain, a whispered conversation that ended too quickly. Instead, it arrived beneath the bright lights of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport on an ordinary Thursday evening. My name is Emma Parker. I was 35 years old, a senior risk analyst for a technology company in downtown Seattle, and married to Ryan Parker for 7 years. That evening, I was standing near the arrivals terminal waiting for my parents. They had retired to Arizona 3 years earlier and rarely traveled. My father hated airports. My mother hated feeling like a burden. If they were making the trip, it meant they genuinely missed home. I checked the arrival screen and glanced at my phone. A text from Ryan. Still in Denver. Meeting ran long. Probably another day before I fly back. Love you. I slipped my phone into my purse. At that exact moment, I noticed a familiar figure near the exit doors. Ryan. At first, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. He was supposed to be hundreds of miles away. Instead, he was standing less than 50 feet from me. Then I saw the woman. Tall, blonde, confident, beautiful in the effortless way that attracts attention without trying. She laughed at something Ryan said. He smiled back. Not the polite smile he gave strangers. Not the tired smile he gave me lately. A different smile. A personal one. Then he leaned forward and kissed her. Everything around me seemed to disappear. The noise. The announcements. The crowds. None of it mattered. I simply stood there holding a cup of coffee that suddenly felt as heavy as a brick. Oddly enough, the kiss was not what hurt most. It was what happened afterward. The woman handed Ryan her suitcase. Without hesitation, he took it. He carried it beside her as they walked toward the exit. Years earlier, Ryan used to grab my bags before I even asked. Recently, he barely noticed when I carried groceries up 3 flights of stairs. That small gesture shattered something inside me. Not because it was dramatic, because it was honest. You cannot fake habits. You only do those things for people who matter. I took a step forward. I wanted answers. I wanted the truth. I wanted him to look me in the eyes and explain everything. Before I could move again, a strong hand rested firmly on my shoulder. I turned. My father was standing beside me. His expression never changed as he watched Ryan disappear through the airport doors. Then, he quietly said words that changed everything. Do not stop him. Not today. For a few seconds, I could not speak. I kept staring toward the airport doors where Ryan and the woman had disappeared. Part of me wanted to run after them. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to pretend I had imagined everything. My father kept his hand on my shoulder. His grip was calm and steady. The grip of a man who had already made a decision. Dad, I whispered. I know. That was all he said. No questions.
No shock. No confusión.
Just those 2 words. I know. When I finally turned around, my mother was standing a few feet behind him. Her face broke my heart more than the betrayal itself. Mothers always know when something is wrong. Sometimes they know before their children do. She wrapped her arms around me without saying a word. I did not cry. Not because I was strong. Because I was too stunned. Ryan had just walked past me with another woman and never once looked in my direction. Not once. It was as if I did not exist. My father picked up one of their suitcases. Let's get out of here. The drive back into Seattle was unusually quiet. Traffic crawled along the highway while downtown lights slowly appeared in the distance. About 20 minutes into the drive, my phone buzzed again. Ryan. I already knew what the message would say. Still with suppliers. Long day. Miss you.
Talk tomorrow.
I stared at the screen. The lie was so effortless. So automatic. Almost professional. My father noticed my expression. Another update from Denver? I nodded. He looked out the window. Interesting. What does that mean? He remained silent for several moments. Then he finally spoke. Emma, men having affairs is unfortunately common. But something about this feels different. Different how? He folded his arms. Because most men who are cheating are afraid of being caught. Ryan wasn't acting afraid. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. He wasn't being careful. He looked comfortable, confident. like someone who believed there would never be consequences. I thought about what I had seen. He was right. Ryan had not acted nervous. He had acted secure, almost entitled. My father continued. I've spent 30 years investigating financial misconduct. You learn to recognize certain personality traits. People who lie in one area of life usually lie in others. I glanced at him. You think this is about money too? I think there is something else going on. And I think we need to find out exactly what it is before making a single move. Outside, Seattle traffic continued flowing toward the city. Inside the car, my entire marriage was beginning to look very different. Some lies hide affairs. Others hide disasters. The next morning, my father was already awake when I came into the kitchen. A cup of black coffee sat beside him. His laptop was open. A yellow legal pad rested on the table. It looked less like a family visit and more like the beginning of an investigation. I poured myself coffee and sat across from him. You really think Ryan is hiding something financially? My father nodded. I do. And I know someone who can help us find out. That afternoon, he called an old friend named Daniel Brooks. Daniel had spent most of his career analyzing struggling companies, bankruptcies, and corporate fraud cases. If there was a problem hiding beneath the surface, Daniel knew where to look. 3 days later, he arrived at my condo carrying a thin folder. That folder ended my remaining illusions. Ryan owned a small chain of home decor stores around the Seattle area. For years, I believed the business was simply going through occasional rough periods. That was the story Ryan always told. Retail is tough. Sales are down. The economy is changing. Every business owner says things like that. But Daniel showed us a completely different picture. The company was drowning. Several suppliers were waiting on overdue payments. The business credit line was nearly exhausted. Revenue had been declining for over a year. Operating expenses were rising faster than income.
A
potential investor had been reviewing the company, but appeared increasingly hesitant. The deeper Daniel looked, the worse everything became. I stared at the financial reports spread across the dining room table. Numbers had always been my profession. I analyzed risk for a living. Yet somehow I had completely missed the biggest risk sitting inside my own marriage. Could the company recover? I asked. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Anything is possible, but recovery requires time, cash, and credibility. Right now, Ryan is running low on all three. The room became quiet. Suddenly, dozens of conversations from the previous year started replaying in my mind. Ryan asking questions about my savings. Ryan mentioning joint financing. Ryan discussing refinancing options. Ryan wanting to know more about my retirement accounts. At the time, I had viewed those conversations as normal discussions between spouses. Now they looked completely different. They looked strategic. My father watched me carefully. You see it now, don't you? I slowly nodded. For the first time, I did. Ryan was not managing a temporary setback. He was managing a collapse. Like a man rearranging furniture inside a house that was already on fire. The frightening part was not that his business was failing. The frightening part was realizing how desperately he seemed determined to find someone else to absorb the damage. And suddenly, I was forced to ask myself a question I never thought I would have to ask. Was I his wife? Or was I his backup plan? After Daniel left, I spent most of the evening sitting alone in my living room. The city lights shimmered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Cars moved below. People walked home from work. Everything looked normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. The reports Daniel had shown us remained spread across the coffee table. I kept reading them. Not because I needed more information. Because I was finally connecting pieces I had ignored for far too long. Over the previous year, Ryan had become unusually interested in our finances. At first, the questions seemed harmless. How much do you have in savings? Have you thought about refinancing? Maybe we should combine more of our assets. Back then, I thought he was trying to build a stronger future together. Now I understood something painful. Every conversation had been leading somewhere. The first major warning sign appeared 8 months earlier. Ryan had suggested adding his name to my condo. He claimed it would simplify future financial planning. I remember laughing and telling him it seemed unnecessary. He dropped the subject immediately. At the time, I viewed that as maturity. Now I realized he was simply changing tactics. A few months later, he suggested applying for a joint line of credit. Again, he framed it as a smart financial tool, a safety net, something responsible couples should consider. I declined, not because I distrusted him, because I disliked debt. Ryan looked disappointed, but quickly moved on. Again, I thought the conversation was over. It wasn't. Then came the discussions about home equity. The condo had been gifted to me by my parents years before my marriage. It was legally mine. Separate property. Protected. Ryan knew that. One evening, he casually mentioned how much unused value was sitting inside the property. Another time, he talked about how successful business owners leverage assets. The conversations always sounded educational, helpful, supportive, never demanding. At least not yet. The realization hit me like cold water. Ryan had not been trying to build a future with me. He had been trying to build access. Access to my credit. Access to my assets. Access to my financial stability. The affair suddenly made more sense too. Both situations shared the same pattern. Ryan pursued whatever benefited him most at that moment. The blonde woman offered excitement. I offered security. Neither relationship seemed built on love. Both appeared built on utility. That thought hurt more than I expected. 7 years together. 7 years of birthdays, holidays, family dinners, vacation photos, shared dreams. And now I was questioning how much of it had ever been real. My father sat down beside me. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world. I gave a small smile. Maybe just 7 years. He nodded. Then he said something I never forgot. People reveal who they are when pressure arrives. Success hides character flaws. Failure exposes them. I looked down at the reports again. For the first time, I understood exactly what was happening. Suddenly, every conversation about our future sounded like a business proposal. And I was beginning to realize that Ryan's most valuable investment had never been his company. It had been me. Most people think revenge begins with confrontation. A screaming match. A dramatic confession. A door slammed so hard the walls shake. In reality, the most effective battles often begin with silence. That was the path I chose. I never told Ryan what I had seen at the airport. I never mentioned the blonde woman. I never accused him of anything. Instead, I acted exactly the same. Every morning, I went to work. Every evening, I came home. We ate dinner together. We talked about traffic, weather, and meaningless daily updates. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. Ryan seemed relieved. Whatever fear he might have felt about being discovered slowly faded. He believed his secret was safe. That confidence became his greatest weakness. While he relaxed, Daniel continued digging. Quietly, carefully, methodically. My father kept me updated every few days. The first problem appeared with one of Ryan's largest suppliers. For months they had been extending payment deadlines. Now they suddenly wanted updated financial documentation. Ryan wasn't expecting the request. The second issue arrived shortly afterward. The owner of his primary warehouse property began discussing lease renewal terms earlier than expected. The new pricing was significantly higher. The third problem proved even more serious. The investor Ryan had been counting on requested a deeper review of company finances. What had once looked like a routine investment process suddenly became intense scrutiny. None of these events were fabricated. No one lied. No one manipulated records. People simply started asking harder questions. And Ryan did not have good answers. One evening, he came home looking unusually exhausted. His tie was loosened. His shoulders sagged. He dropped heavily onto the sofa. Rough day? I asked. He rubbed his forehead. Just business headaches. Nothing major. I nodded and continued reading my book. Inside, I knew that was another lie. The headaches were major. The pressure was growing. And for the first time, Ryan was starting to feel it. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern continued. More phone calls. More stress. More late nights. More vague explanations. The confident entrepreneur I had known for years was beginning to crack. His stories became shorter. His optimism felt forced. Sometimes I would catch him staring at his phone for several minutes without moving, as if waiting for good news that never arrived. One night my father called. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected." "Good. Because this part requires patience." I understood exactly what he meant. The truth did not need help. It only needed exposure. Ryan had spent years building a carefully controlled image. A successful businessman. A devoted husband. A man with a bright future. Now reality was slowly peeling that image apart layer by layer. And the most difficult part for me was not fighting back. It was sitting quietly and watching the truth do all the work on its own. The collapse did not happen all at once. There was no dramatic announcement.
No headline.
No single catastrophic event. Instead, Ryan's world came apart the way most business failures do. One bad week at a time. The first major blow arrived when the investor officially withdrew. After months of meetings, presentations, and promises, they decided not to move forward. Ryan tried to act like it wasn't a big deal. At dinner, he casually mentioned that the investor wanted to wait for better market conditions. I nodded as if I believed him. But later that night, my father called. "The investor is gone." "Completely?" "Completely." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument, because both of us knew what it meant. Ryan had just lost the lifeline he was counting on. Without that money, every existing problem suddenly became much more dangerous. Over the next several days, I watched the pressure build. Ryan stopped talking about expansion plans. He stopped discussing future projects. He stopped pretending everything was under control. Instead, he became obsessed with finding cash. One evening, he approached me while I was working at the kitchen table. "Have you ever considered opening a joint credit account with me?" The question seemed casual. The timing was not.
Why?
"Just thinking about financial flexibility." I smiled politely. "I'm happy with the accounts I already have." The disappointment flashed across his face before he could hide it. A few days later, he tried again. This time the request was more direct. "A bank is offering favorable loan terms. They would probably approve us easily." Us. A married couple looks stronger financially. I closed my laptop. "I'm not interested."
His jaw tightened.
For a moment, I thought he might argue. Instead, he forced a smile and changed the subject. The following week brought even worse news. One supplier demanded partial payment before shipping additional inventory. Another shortened payment deadlines. Cash flow tightened further. Ryan began pacing around the condo at night. Sometimes I woke up at 2 in the morning and found him sitting alone in the dark living room, staring at his phone, refreshing emails, waiting, hoping. One Saturday morning, he made his boldest request yet. "We should consider using the condo's equity." I looked at him calmly.
Why?
"Just temporarily. A bridge loan. 6 months. Maybe less. The business stabilizes and everything goes back to normal. The condo stays exactly where it is." "I already told you no. You didn't even think about it." "Actually, I've thought about it a lot." The answer is still no. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I could see frustration building behind his eyes. Not frustration because I disagreed. Frustration because his plan was failing. That was the moment I realized something important. Ryan was no longer looking for solutions. He was looking for rescue. And he believed I should provide it. Meanwhile, his business continued sinking. Every phone call seemed worse than the one before. Every week brought another setback. Every conversation became more desperate. The man who once walked into every room full of confidence now carried himself like someone trying to outrun an approaching storm. And for the first time, the mask was beginning to slip. Soon, everyone would see what had been hiding underneath all along. The argument happened on a rainy Thursday night. Seattle was covered in low-gray clouds, the kind of weather that makes the entire city feel tired. I arrived home just after 6. Ryan was already there. He was sitting at the kitchen island staring at his phone. He didn't look up when I walked in. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he finally broke the silence. "The bank cut the credit line." I placed my bag on the counter. "I'm sorry to hear that." That was not the response he wanted. He wanted panic,
Concern.
sympathy. Instead, I remained calm. His frustration became visible immediately. Do you understand what that means? I looked at him. I understand that your business is having serious problems. Serious problems? He laughed bitterly. That's one way to describe it. He stood up and began pacing. The familiar confidence was gone. In its place was something much uglier. Desperation. I need help, Emma. Real help. I said nothing. He continued. We can still fix this. We can use the condo.
No.
A personal loan then.
No.
Your savings.
No.
The word came out calmly every single time.
No anger. No explanation.
Just no. Eventually something inside him snapped. His voice rose. You are my wife. You're supposed to support me. Support does not mean financing your debts. His face darkened. You don't get it. If this business fails, everything I've worked for is gone. I folded my arms. Then maybe you should have thought about that before now. The silence that followed was dangerous. For a moment, I saw pure rage behind his eyes. Not sadness. Not fear.
Rage.
Then he said something I will never forget.
Fine.
If you're not willing to help, we'll sell some of your jewelry. I stared at him.
What?
Your parents bought you enough expensive pieces over the years. The diamond earrings, the bracelets, the necklaces. We can liquidate some of that. The words hung in the air. Cold.
Ugly.
Unbelievable. Ryan kept talking. Once the business recovers, we can replace everything. I barely heard the rest. Something inside me had gone completely still. For years, I had been trying to understand him, excuse him, defend him, explain away every red flag. Stress, pressure, business problems, bad timing. I had spent years creating excuses for behavior that never deserved excuses. And now, standing in my own kitchen, I finally saw the truth. I was not talking to a husband fighting for his future. I was talking to a man searching for assets. A man calculating value. A man looking around the room and deciding what could be sold. The condo, the savings, the jewelry, the salary. The realization was almost liberating, because at that moment, every remaining doubt disappeared. I stopped seeing my husband. I started seeing the man behind the mask. And the man behind the mask was someone I no longer recognized. Ryan kept talking, still trying to persuade me, still trying to negotiate. But I had already stopped listening. The marriage ended in my heart before the conversation was over. That night, after he finally went to bed, I sat alone in the dark living room. Then I pulled out my phone. I opened a message thread with my father. And for the first time since the airport, I typed the words I had been holding back.
It's time.
My father called less than 2 minutes after receiving my message. His voice was calm as always. Are you certain?
Yes.
There was no hesitation in my answer. Not anymore.
Good.
Then we moved forward. The next morning I met Daniel for coffee before work. He listened carefully while I described the argument from the night before. I repeated Ryan's suggestion about selling my jewelry. I explained how he kept pushing for access to my assets. Daniel remained quiet until I finished. Then he slowly nodded. He's out of options. What do you mean? I mean the business is finished. He's just looking for someone else to absorb the impact. The words didn't hurt. Not anymore. Because deep down, I already knew they were true. After leaving the coffee shop, I drove directly to a law office overlooking Elliott Bay. The attorney Daniel recommended was named Rebecca Mitchell. She specialized in complex divorce cases. Sharp, efficient,
Direct.
exactly the kind of person I needed. For nearly an hour, she reviewed every document I brought. Property, records, financial statements, tax returns, trust documents, marriage records. When she finally looked up, her conclusion was immediate. Your condo is protected. Completely? Completely. It was transferred to you before marriage. The ownership has remained separate. There is no realistic path for him to claim it. For the first time in weeks, I felt myself breathe normally. Rebecca continued. Did you ever sign business guarantees?
No.
Joint business loans?
No.
Corporate debt obligations? Never. She smiled slightly. Then your position is extremely strong. The meeting lasted another hour. By the end, I had a clear plan. The paperwork would be prepared. The filing would begin. The marriage would officially end. Simple. Professional. Final. What surprised me most was how little emotion I felt. Months earlier, the idea would have devastated me. Now it felt like completing paperwork after discovering a major accounting error. The facts were what they were. Ignoring them would not change reality. That weekend, my parents flew back to Seattle. Neither of them wanted me facing the final confrontation alone. My mother checked into a nearby hotel. My father reviewed every step of the legal process with me. Not because he thought I was incapable, because he wanted me protected. By Monday afternoon, Rebecca called. Everything is ready.
You only need to tell me when.
I sat at my desk overlooking downtown Seattle. Employees moved between conference rooms.
Phone is rang.
Emails arrived. The world continued exactly as it always had. Meanwhile, 7 years of marriage sat inside a folder waiting for a signature. I looked out the window for a long moment. Then I picked up the phone. Let's do it. Excellent. The filing was submitted that same day. When I hung up, I felt something unexpected. Not sadness. Not anger. Relief. For weeks, I had been carrying uncertainty. Now there was none. The path ahead was clear. That evening, I met my parents at their hotel.
We talked about ordinary things.
Restaurants. Weather. Travel plans. Nobody mentioned Ryan. Nobody needed to. The decision had already been made. As we stood to leave, my mother hugged me tightly. Are you ready? I thought about the airport, the lies,
The debts.
the manipulation, the months of pretending. Then I smiled. For the first time in a very long time.
Yes.
I'm ready. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday evening. There was no dramatic setup. No carefully planned speech. No audience. Just the truth finally arriving at its destination. My father came over shortly before 6. Ryan was already home when we arrived. He was standing in the kitchen scrolling through his phone. The moment he saw my father walk through the front door, something changed in his expression. Not fear. Recognition. Like a man suddenly realizing the final bill had arrived. Ryan forced a smile. Michael.
Good to see you.
My father nodded politely. Then he sat down in the living room without another word. I remained standing across the kitchen island. Ryan looked at me. What's going on? I took a slow breath. We need to talk. His shoulders stiffened. About what? About the airport. The color drained from his face. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he laughed nervously. What airport? Seattle, Tacoma. 5 weeks ago. You and the blonde woman. The smile disappeared. You were there?
Yes.
My parents were too. Ryan's eyes immediately began searching for an explanation. A colleague. A business associate. Nothing happened. I shook my head. You kissed her. You carried her luggage. You left together. Let's not insult each other by pretending otherwise. The silence that followed felt endless. For the first time since I had known him, Ryan genuinely looked trapped. Then I continued. Her name is Lauren Mitchell. She worked at one of your stores. You've been seeing her for months. His eyes widened. How much do you know? Enough. I know about Lauren. I know about the suppliers. I know about the investor. I know about the credit line.
I know about the debts.
And I know exactly why you've spent the last year trying to gain access to my assets. Every word landed like a hammer. Ryan stared at me. Then his expression hardened. So that's what this is. You and your father. You planned this. My father finally spoke from the living room. Planned what? The suppliers turning cautious. The investor leaving. Everything. You sabotaged.
Me.
My father remained perfectly calm. Then prove it. The room fell silent. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it, because he couldn't prove it. No one had fabricated anything. No one had lied. People simply made decisions based on accurate information. The truth had destroyed him, not us. I reached into my tote bag and removed a large envelope. Ryan immediately recognized it. What is that? Divorce papers. The words hung in the air.
Heavy. Permanent.
Final. I filed yesterday. His face twisted with anger. You can't be serious. I have never been more serious. I placed the envelope on the counter. The condo is mine. The marriage is over. And I want you out of my home tonight. For a moment, I thought he might explode. Instead, he just stood there staring at me, like he was seeing a completely different person. Maybe he was. Because the woman standing in front of him was no longer willing to ignore reality. No longer willing to be manipulated. No longer willing to serve as someone else's emergency plan. Eventually, Ryan grabbed the envelope. His hands trembled slightly. You think you won? I looked at him calmly. This isn't about winning. It's about ending something that should have ended a long time ago. An hour later, he carried his bags to the front door. Neither my father nor I said a word. When the door finally closed behind him, the condo became completely silent. I stood there listening to that silence. And for the first time in years, it felt peaceful. Not lonely, not empty. Peaceful. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't letting someone go. It's finally accepting who they really are. Life became surprisingly quiet after Ryan left. Not immediately better, just quieter. And sometimes quiet is the first step toward healing. Over the following weeks, everything unfolded exactly as Daniel had predicted. The business continued collapsing. One supplier filed a lawsuit. Another stopped shipments completely. Without inventory, sales dropped even further. Without sales, bills piled up. Within a month, 2 of Ryan's stores closed. A few weeks later, the remaining locations followed. The company that had consumed so much of his attention simply stopped existing.
The
investor never came back. The bank never changed its decision. The creditors kept moving forward. Reality had finally caught up with him. Lauren disappeared too. That part surprised me the least. People who are attracted to success rarely stay for failure. One afternoon, a friend sent me a photo from social media. Lauren was smiling on a yacht beside another businessman.
different man.
Same smile. I closed the photo and never looked at it again. The divorce process itself was remarkably simple. There was very little to argue about. The condo remained mine. Ryan kept what was left of his personal belongings. Lawyers handled the details. Judges signed documents. Meetings happened. Deadlines passed. And eventually, it was over. A marriage that lasted 7 years officially ended in less than 20 minutes inside a courtroom. When the final hearing concluded, I walked outside with my parents. The Seattle sky was unusually clear. Sunlight reflected off the glass buildings downtown. For a few moments, none of us spoke. Then my mother squeezed my hand. It's over. I nodded. Yes, it's over. My father stood beside us quietly. The same man who had placed a hand on my shoulder at the airport months earlier. The same man who had stopped me from reacting emotionally. The same man who understood that protection is sometimes more important than revenge. As we walked toward the parking garage, I realized something important. Ryan had spent years believing he could survive on other people's trust, other people's patience, other people's resources. But eventually, every person reaches a boundary. And when that boundary arrives, the game ends. That night, I returned to my condo, my home. I made tea, sat beside the window, and watched the city lights come alive below. There was no celebration, no dramatic victory, just peace. And sometimes peace is the greatest gift you can give yourself. Sometimes the strongest revenge is not destruction. It's refusing to be used one more day. If you've ever had to walk away from someone who only valued you when they needed something, share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join Smart Revenge for more stories about resilience, self-respect, and choosing yourself when it matters most.